Well, how would we address it if we wanted to redress the segregation of Levittown? Well, probably we'd need an affirmative action program in housing that would be completely constitutionally justified because of the history of how the segregated characteristics of Levittown were created. The federal government should be buying up homes in Levittown for $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, whatever the market price is, and reselling them to qualified African Americans at a deep discount. That would be a narrowly targeted remedy for a very explicit, racially explicit constitutional violation. There's no basis for challenging such an affirmative action program if it's based on the history of how the segregation was created. What's missing is not a policy idea. What's missing is a new civil rights movement to demand, to insist, and to achieve the political power to make such a program possible. We reinforce segregation today with policies for low-income families as well. The biggest subsidy we have for low-income families who are disproportionately minority is the low-income housing tax credit. It's a program administered by the Federal Treasury Department. They issue tax credits to states who then distribute them to nonprofit developers to build housing for low-income families. The Treasury Department regulations for the use of the low-income housing tax credit places a priority on placing low-income housing tax credit units in already low-income neighborhoods, reinforcing their segregation. That's crazy. It's backwards. We should have a priority for placing those units in high-opportunity communities where families have access to good jobs and transportation and healthy food and healthy air. We don't do it in part because after all the suburbs that I described were created, inexpensive suburbs at first, as they grew in value, the suburbs adopted zoning ordinances that prohibit the construction of anything but single-family homes on large lot sizes. No townhouses, no apartments, low-level apartments, no garden apartments. Those zoning ordinances, in my judgment, and I don't think, in fact, I know that the legal scholars don't disagree with me, those zoning ordinances, where they perpetuate an unconstitutionally created segregation, should themselves be subject to challenge. There are a few communities that are placing more of their low-income housing tax credit units in high-opportunity communities, but not many. The same thing is true of the Section 8 voucher program, which also reinforces segregation because one of the reasons I just said, that there are very few apartments available in high-opportunity communities. Where they are available, even in the few places in this country where it's prohibited by law, landlords are permitted well, they're not permitted in the few places where it's prohibited, but in general, landlords refuse to rent to Section 8 voucher holders in high opportunity communities. And so the only place in practice where Section 8 vouchers can mostly be used is in low-income communities, reinforcing their segregation. There are many, many other policies we could follow in order to redress segregation. As I said, what's missing is a new civil rights movement that would make it uncomfortable for the maintenance of this kind of segregated system. Gentrification is happening around the country, in many places reinforcing segregation by displacing large numbers of low-income, minority, African-American, and Hispanic families, and forcing them into new, more isolated, low-income segregated neighborhoods, as the neighborhoods in which they've historically lived transition from low-income segregated neighborhoods to high-income white segregated neighborhoods. The policies, again, to prevent that from happening are well known. Gentrification could be a very positive force if it created communities that were economically diverse and that preserved the ability of people who historically lived in those communities to remain. The policies to affect that under pressure of gentrification include rent control. They include limits on condominium conversions. They include inclusionary zoning programs that require a share of units that are built in these communities to be both for low-income families and for working-class families who also are priced out of housing markets in hot market areas. And we should be freezing property taxes in these places because many families, low income, minority families who own their own homes, own them free and clear, no longer mortgaged, can no longer afford to live in them because the property taxes rise as the community gentrifies. Freezing property taxes does not require a long-term loss of revenue for schools and libraries and fire departments. If we had a policy of freezing property taxes for existing homeowners, the lost property taxes could be returned to the Treasury at point of sale. So if you have a homeowner, particularly, for example, an African-American homeowner living in a historically Black neighborhood who bought his or her home for, say, $30,000 30 years ago and paid property taxes at the frozen rate on $30,000 value of a home, and then sells the home as the community gentrifies for $300,000. Instead of making a $250,000 profit when the home is sold, the lost property taxes can at that point be returned to the Treasury, and perhaps the homeowner only makes a $200,000 capital gain. So these policies are all well discussed. They're known to policy experts. What's needed is a civil rights movement that's going to effectively demand that they be implemented. I am working today with a group of national civil rights leaders to create a new national committee to redress segregation. The committee would have as its object the creation of local committees that would form in local communities to create the pressure to change the political atmosphere in which we redress segregation. It will be focused on 4 different kinds of policies. One is improving the resources in existing low-income segregated neighborhoods so that they become healthier places to live for people who remain. Second is creating opportunities for African Americans in particular and Hispanics and to move to higher opportunity communities if they choose to do so. Third are the policies I described a minute ago to prevent gentrification from resulting in massive displacement of minority families. And fourth is preserving desegregation where it exists, where communities are in transition but haven't fully flipped from one form of segregation to another, and preserving on a conscious basis that desegregated pattern. We were about to launch this national committee to redress racial segregation when the pandemic social distancing rules hit, so we put it on hold. We're about to launch it again, and any of you who would like to be on the announcement list to receive an announcement of this new national committee should let me have your email addresses and names in the communities in which you live, and I'll be sure to add you to that list. With that, I want to thank you for your attention, and I hope you have a very successful meeting. Thank you.